Benissimo, allora possiamo partire. Good evening and welcome to another appointment in this cycle of international video conferences dedicated to tramways, and not only, because, for example, tonight we have trolley buses that are other means of transport, of course. Tonight's presentation comes from the United Kingdom, and Hugh McAulay will talk about the history of trolley buses in Newcastle upon Tyne, big British system of the past. This presentation will be done in English. At the end of the evening, there will be a space for any questions in English or in Italian, and you can also use the chat in English in every moment during the presentation. The complete program of the forthcoming presentations is available on our internet site on the English section. Before giving the floor to Hugh, I remind you that on a Tuesday, November 21st, we'll have a presentation from Portugal, and this time it will deal with the Porto Tram Museum. Thank you, and now I repeat everything in Italian, and then the floor goes to Hugh. Buonasera, benvenuti a tutti a un altro appuntamento in questo ciclo di videoconferenze internazionali dedicate ai tram, ma non solo. E infatti questa sera parleremo di Filobus. La presentazione di questa sera viene dal Regno Unito, ed esattamente da Newcastle sul Tyne, da dove Hugh McAulay ci parlerà della storia dei Filobus in quella città, che è stata una grande rete filoviaria nel passato in quella nazione. La presentazione sarà fatta in inglese. Alla fine della serata ci sarà spazio per domande in inglese o in italiano, e potete anche usare la chat in qualsiasi momento durante la presentazione. Il programma completo delle prossime presentazioni è disponibile sul nostro sito internet. Ma prima di dare la parola a Hugh, vi ricordo che il prossimo appuntamento tra 15 giorni, il 21 novembre, avremo una presentazione dal Portogallo che tratterà del Museo del Tram di Oporto. Grazie, e ora la parola va a Hugh. Hugh, the floor now goes to you.
Okay, thank you, Roberto. Before I start, can I just make the point? My name is pronounced Hugh, not without the G. It's silent.
Sorry.
It's okay. It struck me that where most people will know that the capital of the United Kingdom is London, a fair number may not be too sure exactly where Newcastle upon Tyne is, which is why I've got this map up showing the southern Scotland and the north half of England. Newcastle sits on the River Tyne and is about 8 or 9 miles from the sea. It was originally a Roman settlement. It's now often referred to as the regional capital of northeast England, the metropolitan area having a population of 823,000. Its trolleybus system was the largest of the 5 northeast England systems. Newcastle upon Tyne, South Shields, Darlington, West Hartlepool and Teesside Railers Traction Board, which sounds horribly complicated, but was actually a combination of 2 urban district councils. The system at its maximum was one of the biggest in the UK, and if it had ever been extended to its authorised extent, it may well have been the biggest system outside London. It was referred to as the Newcastle Corporation Transport and Electricity Undertaking until the nationalisation of electricity in 1948, when it lost its power station. But it was the 1st of October 1935 to the 1st of October 1966. In other words, it closed 31 years to the day of its opening. That's a map of the tram system at its maximum extent, and the red dotted line is the city boundary, and you can see that quite a few tram routes went well beyond the boundary. Newcastle was, at the beginning of the 20th century, surrounded by coal mines and very heavily industrialized. Industry along the north bank of the river from the city to the west, and from the city to the east to the sea, there was numerous shipyards and heavy engineering. The first trolley vehicle proposals were 1911, when they wanted to serve the mining village of Westerhope, and the two routes were proposed. The Westerhope route would have been a reasonable length, 2 miles, 1,000 yards. The Bladen route would have been a bit shorter. Nothing came of this, but in 1912, they started motor bus services, and this was one of the first vehicles. They were either Tilling Stevens or Straker Squire. There's no identification of this vehicle. But they eventually, by the mid-20s, built up quite a network of routes out into the surrounding part of Northumberland where mining villages were. Originally, routes started from tram routes, but by the 20s, they were running into the city centre. The big building in the middle there is the transport offices, head office at Manners, and the long building behind was the power station, the chimney to the left there. Alongside the chimney was the North East Railway's main line from Newcastle to Edinburgh, now part of the East Coast Main Line. And they had a line straight into the yard for coal for the power station. As I said before, they lost the power station in 1948. In 1931, there was a big discussion about the Osborne Road tram route. It went into what up in here in Scotland they call a douce suburb, in other words, a very upmarket, shall we say, posh district. It was then, it's not so much now, it's more like Studentville. But the tram track was in need of relaying, and there was an extensive discussion whether to replace the trams with buses or renew the tram track. Trolley buses didn't enter into it, funny enough. The locals campaigned to keep their trams, and there was a sort of compromise in that the tram track was to be patched up for the foreseeable future, as it were. Little did they know they would have trolley buses in 7 years. Oops, where are we? That's it. At the top of the screen, there's a key to the routes. The solid red routes became trolleybus routes. The routes with hatching were tram routes that did not become trolleybus routes. And the orange route from west to east is the first trolleybus route of 1935. It was 7 miles long, over 7 miles long, and ran for 3/4 of a mile at its eastern end into the borough of Wallsend, where the shipbuilding continued beyond Newcastle down the river. It had replaced a tram as far as here. Drat, that shouldn't happen. Sorry. And this loop here had been a bus route to the city centre, which the trolley buses took over. The boundary, they were right up against the then boundary at Denton Burn. The burn itself was a boundary, and the village of Denton Burn was over the boundary. This is a pre-service testing in the autumn of 1935 down Denton Bank. This area was being developed as after the First World War, the west half of Newcastle exploded with housing very quickly in the late 20s and early 30s. The house I was born in 1937 had only been built in 1934. And although I didn't know it, but on the other side of the street, there was still open land for 2 or 3 years. The vehicles you can see, the one on the left, number 22, is a Carrier E6A 3-axle. All pre-war trolleybuses in Newcastle were 3-axle with front exits, with the door electrically operated by the driver, and with twin staircases. The vehicle on the right is an AEC, an Associated Equipment Company vehicle. There's a peculiarity. If you look at the back of 22, the indicator dent and burn, you notice that letters get shorter in the middle, and underneath, you can't read it, but it would have via Denton Bank. They did that in some of the pre-war trolleybuses, but not the post-war trolleybuses. The car on the right.
I have no picture. Is this okay? Hello, I only see the people. I have no picture. Is this okay?
I'm sorry, I can't follow you.
I have no picture. I have only the people.
The pictures
No,
here.
we can see the pictures. It's okay.
No pictures now. Not yet.
Roberto, can the picture be seen?
Yeah, yes, I can see.
I see only the faces of the people.
I think it's your problem.
Yeah.
That's okay. I will look for. Thanks.
Okay.
Right, the car you can see on the right, you will see in some subsequent photographs. I believe it was the photographer. Who he was is unknown. This yellow stop sign was used from the first in 1935 throughout the trolleybus system. If it was a fare stage as opposed to request stop, fare stage would be in the same block capitals but in red. Another view further down Denton Bank, you notice that the traction poles either have not been painted or they'd been silver painted. They were subsequently green. By the time I began to notice things during the Second World War, they were green. The one on the left is another Carrier, and the one on the right is another AEC, Associated Equipment Company, both on test. And there again is the proverbial car. There it is again. This is a back view of number 15, which was another AEC, and they'd never had a number on the front, which is unfortunate, but going by the registration number, it would be number 20. The Denton boundary destination was actually a short working, and there was a loop in the middle of the main road. This is the main road west out of Newcastle, the A69, which led ultimately to Hexham and Carlisle. Note that Newcastle Corporation Transport is carried along the chocolate band. These bands were chocolate. This was yellow, these sections, and the roof was cream. The service opened on the 1st of October 1935 with much municipal junketing. They had problems on the second day with power supply, but it settled down, and the receipts were very good, etc. Note on the left here the gas lamp. This gas lighting survived into the 60s. The street I was born is here, and I was about 200 yards up to the left. And this entire hillside here is now housing. It developed in the 60s and 70s. It's showing 4B, which was a short working to St. Nicholas Cathedral from the boundary loop at the bottom of the bank. The bank was pretty steep, and they had been unable to get a tram route down it because of the gradient. But in the late 20s, the gradient was eased at the top of the bank. But by that time, any idea of a tram down the hill to Denton Burn had died. Uh-oh. Hang on, I seem to have a problem. No, here we go. This is another view. I don't know if it's the color, if it's the black and white film of the time, but that one appears to be much brighter, but it's the same livery. This is taken in a loop, the term loop in the city centre, St. Nicholas Cathedral. The cathedral was off to the left of the car. Fox and Hounds was a pub, a public house on the West Road. It'd been there as a country pub, and it becomes surrounded by housing. You see the stop sign, and that you can see the size of it. This is an AEC, and that's about all I can say about that. The corporation didn't just buy one type of trolleybus pre-war. They moved between Carrier and Guy and AEC, and the firms made the most of it in publicity. Note the advert on the side, Dunning Snails. Most adverts on the trolleybuses and the buses were actually painted on during repaint. This is a view by the Guy Motors. It's probably taken at the Fallings Park factory in Wolverhampton. And these Guy BTXs were supplied for the second route conversion in 1937. And again, Metropolitan Vickers, who supplied quite a few electrical equipment pre-war, using Newcastle trolleybuses for publicity purposes. I'm told, incidentally, that, or I have been told, I should say, that the Sydney trolleybuses, was it 1937, was said to have been modelled on the Newcastle idea of shape and the front exit. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. This is a shot of the original trolleybus route, where it did a jink. It came out of this road here, City Road, which did not line up with Mosley Street on the left. And they crossed Pilgrim Street at approximately 45 degrees. Pilgrim Street led up to the main shopping area, and this was a business area. And the tram and the bus have just come off the Tyne Bridge, the new Tyne Bridge. The bus belongs to Northern General Transport, and the tram belongs to Gateshead and District Tramways Company as a brush tram of 1923, heading for, I believe, Haymarket. It's difficult to read. This is the same view, more or less, later. These are both 1930s views, pre-1940. The bus is of interest because it's actually an underfloor vehicle from the 1930s. The Northern General Bus Company had a general manager, Colonel Hayter, who was actually an engineer, and he designed a fleet of underfloor buses. And because of the length of them, they had to be 3-axle. There's a trolleybus waiting to come out of Mosley Street and another one out of City Road. This whole area now is unrecognisable. It's a huge roundabout. This was the position in 1937 when the 5 route had been opened. Originally, it ran from Brighton Grove to either, and it had short workings into the city centre from the east. The depot, which all the trolley buses so far were shedded in, it was Wingrove Depot, a former tram depot, which still ran trams till 1946. And 4A is the Fox and Hounds pub, that was the short working. 4B was the Boundary Loop, and the 4s went either one way or the other round the loop. The 4As, it terminated at the same place as the 5A, Church Street, but for some reason the 4A said Walker and the 5A said Church Street. And the 4 went all the way to Wallsend. Come on. Hello. A vehicle on test, it's not known where it is. It could be Biker Depot and Works in Newcastle, or it could be one of the, it could be a guy. There's no identification on it. There's no number plate has been put on it. The fact it's showing 5B tends to indicate it might be 1937 and probably a guy, BTX. This was the turning circle at the bottom of Welbeck Road, the terminus of the 5B. The curves are going to the left. You can see the pool lever for White Street led to Wallsend Park Road, and the wiring going across the bottom there is the original trolleybus route from Wallsend to Denton Burn Loop. Note the use of a gantry. Newcastle had these in many places, and it meant they could utilise tram poles. They didn't have to replace the tram poles. The gantry gave the poles additional strength. In later years, curves were put apart from the turning loop, curves were put round to the right, but that came much later. In 1938, in April, Newcastle's boundary having been extended a few hundred yards over Denton Burn to take in the whole of Denton Burn village, the trolleybus wiring was extended to Denton Square, which as a child puzzled me no end because it wasn't a square, it was round. And they built this turning circle here. This is the main A69 road to Hexham and Carlisle. And this was pure country. Get back. This was pure country beyond. In later years, there was a shelter here, and there was a loop before a siding before the loop. The 4B, which had run to the boundary from St Nicholas Cathedral, was extended here, and the boundary loop was taken out. This is the tram route that never became a trolleybus route. It was going to be a trolleybus route apparently, but the general manager at the time persuaded the Transport Committee to replace it with buses, because round the corner here, this very sharp corner had precluded the tram ever being extended further westwards. This is a cemetery. And round the corner were two bus routes which had been developed serving western suburbs. And he persuaded the Transport Committee to extend those two motor bus routes over the tram route to connect with two other routes in the city centre. And it never became a trolleybus route. This was the situation in 1939. In 1938, there'd been 3 conversions. The 6 to Fenham, to a reverser at a place called Ovington Grove, which was just on the edge of Fenham, but they showed Fenham. The 9 to Osborne Road, which had been the subject of much discussion in 1931, and the 12 to Wallsend boundary. Before 1930, the trams had run into the centre of Wallsend, over the tracks of the Tyneside Tramways and Tramroads Company. But when they converted the buses, the trams had to be cut back to the Newcastle boundary. It was a purely arbitrary terminus, as you'll see later. In 1941, the position the route to Wallsend boundary, the 12 from the central station, was extended up to the Denton Burn loop this way, and a turning loop situated at the bottom, what was called Wickham View. And this section of original route did not have another regular service till 1957. It was used for depot connections because vehicles terminating there late in the evening could run along there and straight up to Wingrove Depot. Melbourne Street, a former tram route that had closed as far back as 1928, was wired during the Second War, 1940, for fear of any damage in the city centre. And wiring was put up Albion Row through a densely terraced area of housing. And the reason for that was here was what was called Biker Bridge. And it was the only link with Biker Depot and Works other than going all the way around by Walker. It was never used by public service. It was disconnected at the end of the war and removed in the 50s. Melbourne Street remained wired. Trolleybuses purchased 1935 to 40. They were numbered 10 to 124 with 2 gaps. But they purchased 27 AECs with a mixture of bodies. However, with the carrier E6As, all the bodies were MCCW, Metropolitan Camel Carriage and Wagon. And Guy Motors, who supplied 35 vehicles with 33 MCCW bodies, 1 row body and 1 Northern Coach Builders. Northern Coach Builders will feature extensively post-war. They were a local firm that had developed a good line in double-decker buses and single-decker buses. And that was the only Northern Coach Builders body that Newcastle bought prior to 1940s, the late 1940s. They bought 1 Daimler commercial vehicle with an MCCW body. 2 numbers in that numbering system were never issued, 110 and 111. All the vehicles had 60 seats and twin staircases, electrically operated front exit. Come on. This is thought to be a wartime picture because the trolleybus is in the wartime livery where the roof was painted grey, light grey, rather than cream. The tram, it demonstrates the state the trams had got into. It had been planned to convert all trams by 1943, and the Second World War put paid to that. And the tram, it probably hasn't been washed for a very long time. There appears to have been some sort of accident because it looks like new woodwork there. But this tram survived into the late 40s, about 1947, 48. An unusual scene, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trolleybuses in a row, very deep snow. This is probably 1941. There was a terrific heavy snowfall one winter, signed up for Wingrove Depot, and that 6 is off the Fenham route, and it's well off its route. You can only be heading for Wingrove Depot. Newcastle had a policy in snowy weather of more or less withdrawing the trolleybuses to avoid any problems with short-circuiting underneath with a build-up of snow. And that may be well what's going on here. Clearly, there's been no attempt made to snow clearing, but this was wartime. Note the use of gantries. This is Westgate Road just off the city centre. The big building there is an Odeon cinema. During the war, they became short of vehicles because of the increase in works traffic, and they attempted to hire vehicles. They hired 5 vehicles from Brighton Corporation, which lasted a very short time, as you'll see later, because of excessive charges. There's another one on the other side of the road. They were put on the Osborne Road route, the number 9, but no attempt was made to show any number. It's interesting that they're actually using the tram stop and the tram island rather than going in the inside as they normally did. This is a good example of the wartime livery. They kept the yellow, the wheel arches have been whitened, the roof has been greyed. This is the Central Station terminus. It could possibly be after World War II because it's got carbon slides as opposed to carbon wheels, which all pre-war vehicles had. They also hired vehicles from Bournemouth Corporation, 9 vehicles in total. I've yet to come across a photograph of a Bournemouth vehicle in Newcastle. And a good friend of mine, David Bowler, who is very much into trolleybus history, etc., he has never come across one either. This was taken in South Shields Marketplace. 4 of the trolleybuses that came to Newcastle were transferred quite quickly to South Shields. Although there's a number box, it's blank because at this point in time, South Shields was not using route numbers for trolleybuses. It's a good photograph of a Bournemouth vehicle, and note the front exit, front entrance. The Bournemouth trolleybuses ran on the route past the end of my street during the war, and I clearly remember one thing about them. They had a front exit door, but it was not electrically operated. There was a mechanism that came into the driver's cab. Whenever the driver stopped, he had to sort of swing round a bit and pull this lever to hold the blooming door open. And then he had to shut it, and he had to do that every time the vehicle stopped. It must have been quite tiring at the end of the day. Yes, the trolleybuses hired during World War II. The 5 from Brighton were AECs 661T, 2 axles with Wayman bodies. They were, of course, in red livery. They arrived in May 42, but returned quickly in September and October 42 because of the higher charges. 9 Sunbeam MS2s, 3-axle 56-seat front entrance bodies came from Bournemouth. Yellow livery, but slightly different shade. It was interesting that whereas with the front exit, Newcastle had 60 seats, Bournemouth only had 56. They arrived December 1942. 1 was returned to Bournemouth in February 1943. 3 transferred to South Shields January and February 43, and the balance of 9 stayed in Newcastle to May 1945. Trolleybus, right. Second-hand vehicles purchased. The only second-hand vehicles they purchased were from Bradford Corporation. I would hesitate to use the word clapped out, but you'll see what I mean in a minute. They dated from 1929-32. English Electric E11 3 axles, 56-seat body. 10 were purchased, and only 9 were prepared for service, but 3 were never licensed, and 1 was cannibalized for spares. They were given the numbers 1 to 9 and the number 0. These numbers had never been used. For some reason, the original fleet in Newcastle started at 10. They had very limited use as rush hour extras, and they only cost for £2,000 for all 10. 1 to 5 and 7 were renumbered, with 300 added to the numbers in 1946, when all trolleybuses had 300 added to their fleet numbers. All were withdrawn by December 1948. And that is one of the best pictures I've ever seen of them. There's two of them, actually. There was just a single blind. There was no route number, no other information. You can see the AEC flash on the front there. They don't look, there's a dent there, and they don't look terribly well maintained. The horn is above the driver's head there. This one here is hiding a stop stand where I used to go into Newcastle Central Library on a Saturday morning when I was about 10 or 11, and I would wait for a trolleybus home there, and one or sometimes two of these would lumber past. That's what it always seemed to be at the time. Corporation Transport Inspector once told me that they never ventured into the West End because of the steep hills, which was a bit surprising because considering the hills they'd gone up and down in Bradford. During the war, Newcastle was allowed to convert a tram route, the Elsick Road tram route, to trolleybus because of the appalling state of the track. And they purchased utility trolleybuses, because during the war, the government controlled all new vehicles, buses and trolleybuses, and there was this sort of utility style body, which was as basic as could be. In 1943, 12 arrived, carrier W4's 2-axle, and went into service when the Elsick Road tram route was converted in June 1944. 2 more arrived in 1938, but they had Wayman bodies, and another 4 in 1945, similar to the first batch. They were all delivered in an all-over unlined battleship grey livery, and they had a revised front indicators layout, but no side or back indicators. They were never fitted post-war. When they started running at Elsick Road, I was 7, and we had used the Elsick Road tram to go to church, and I was quite horrified at these things because they were not proper trolleybuses. They only had 4 wheels. They didn't have a front exit, and they were battleship grey, but boy, could they move. I don't know if it's because the bodies were lightweight or if the drivers were glad to be driving something other than a tram, but they could shift. They were all rapidly repainted in the revised post-war livery at the end of World War II, in all renumbered 425 to 442 in 1946. This is one of the few images I managed to find of one. It's 140. It's become de-wired. It's been turning out what was called Granger Street into Westgate Road, and I suspect that his booms might have come off when he was crossing another set of wires, because for some reason they managed to get the booms on at a very strange angle. But that on the Westgate Road westbound wires, the possible reason to put them there was those wires have the what you might call the power right of way, because there's the insulators for crossing wires. That was the new indicator layout. Instead of the large box and the route number, there was the destination, the via blind. Note the wartime headlamp covers, and just the small light showing. And Spectre there seems to be fussing about it. They're in the post-war livery when Newcastle Transport has been transposed onto the panels, because post-war trolleybuses did not have the sort of shape under the windows. They were, as I say, they were fast, but they were very, very basic vehicles. 1944 to 1949 conversions. The first conversion in 1948, April 18th, 1948, was the long route to Gosforth Park, which crossed the city boundary here. The rest of it was in the Gosforth Urban District Council. it replaced the tram route to Gosforth Park, and the tram route had previously gone through the park, and the corporation had authority to convert the route through the park, but it would have meant building a road because the roads in the park were private and possibly not really wide enough to take trolley buses in both directions. The second conversion, 1948, this bit here was done on the 1st of November 1948. This section along here, why that was ever wired was a bit of a mystery, because along this road, Benton Park Road, it's roughly about a 10-minute bus service by the local operator, United Automobile. And the corporation had their own bus route to this point, Matthew Bank. But convert it they did, and instead of converting the tram route to West or the tram route to Forest Hall, which had to be served by buses which duplicated the trolley buses all the way down there. The last line, in 1944, the only wartime conversion had been the Elswick Road tramway, which had ran as far as Delville Road, but the wires had been extended to join up with the original. Come to that later. 1951, an extension was built in Gosforth along what they call Broadway West. It was only about a quarter of a mile into Grange Estate. It was authorised to go twice the distance, but for some reason it never did. And when they opened the route in April 1948, there was also a spur here, very short spur off the Great North Road, a turning circle, and vehicles going there showed Town Moor. It was only used, it was used for 1 week in the year, the last week in June, when this whole area was filled with what they called hoppings at the massive fair, one of the biggest in Europe. Or if there was a special event like an agricultural show, be used. But for most of the year, the turning circle was barricaded off. So you had quite a overhead wire junction here. Post-war orders. In 1946, an order was placed for 186 vehicles, which was planned to convert the rest of the tram system and possibly replace some of the earlier trolley buses of 1935. They were not necessarily delivered in the numerical order. The first vehicles delivered were these BUTs, 9641T, 3-axle, 70 seats, 8-foot wide bodies. They were identical to London Transport's Q1 class trolley buses, and it's said they were either added onto London Transport's order, or the last 20 London Transport went, but they were identical. The only difference being they were painted yellow. They arrived in March 1948 in time for the conversion of April. These vehicles, Sunbeams, F4 2-axles, with MCCW bodies, they arrived 48-49, and after some of these 30 Sunbeam 7s with 3 axles, they arrived 48. The vehicles ordered in 1947 came in 2 years, 49 to 50, 25 of each Sunbeam F4 2-axle, BUT 9611T 2-axle, with identical NCB bodies. Newcastle were a good customer of NCB post-war, with trolleybus and bus, and quite other operators in the northeast patronised NCB. The last batch of vehicles, 50 BUT 9641Ts, 3-axle, February 1950, but they arrived the following year. Immediately after World War II, the demand for buses in the UK was immense, and deliveries were very slow. The reason Newcastle got these 20 London-style vehicles was by 1947, the tram track in places was apparently appalling, and there'd been a fatal crash which cost the life of a tram driver, and they appealed to the Ministry of Transport to try and get delivery hurried up. And the Ministry of Transport said, you can take 20 of the London-style buses, but you have to take them as they are. You can't have your specification. So they're identical London vehicles. The total order amounted to 70 3-axle vehicles, BUT, 25 2-axle, and 61 Sunbeam F4 2-axle, and 30 Sunbeam S7 2-axle. MCCW, a mouthful, Metropolitan Camel Carriage and Wagon Company, and NCB is Northern Coach Builders. All 113 of the pre-World War II fleet were withdrawn by 1950, some being only 10 years old. The 18-carrier W4 utilities were withdrawn by 1953, stored for 3 years, then scrapped. Behind this odd sort of behaviour was the fact in 1946, the very pro-trolleybus manager, Harry Godsmark, died suddenly at the age of 46 and was succeeded by his deputy, Frank S. Taylor, who was perhaps not as trolleybus-minded as Harry Godsmark had been. Frank Taylor persuaded the Transport Committee to convert some tram routes temporarily, as he put it, to motorbus, and pending delivery of trolleybuses, but of course they remain motorbuses. The 186 vehicles ordered post-war from 1950 became the fleet which survived till which were used for the rest of the system's life. It is said they had more vehicles than they needed, but anyway, they started withdrawing in 1963, even before the first route was converted. The 1944 conversion of the Elsick Road tram produced this loop terminal in the city centre, exactly what the trams had done, up Clayton Street to one of the east-west streets, Blackett Street, where the wiring crossed over and formed this sort of loop, and then back down. The route along Elsick Road was 3A or 3B, 3A and 3B being short workings. A post-war scene outside the Newcastle Central Station. The large building there is the portico of the Central Station, and along here is the station hotel. This is a carrier with row body in post-war livery. Notice the bands that formerly enclosed the chocolate livery. It's about to do the terminal loop to get where this one is. And this vehicle is still in the wartime livery with the grey roof. The bus in the background is in the sort of Prussian blue livery that Newcastle buses were till 1948-49, when they were gradually repainted yellow, the same as the trolley buses. Brief. The reason this view is here is to show, that little switch there was a toggle switch designed for the conductor to change the blinds. At a terminus, the conductor would come around to the front, move the switch up or down, and set the indicator accordingly. The route numbers by now had 30 added to them, so the bus routes were numbered 1 to 30 eventually, and the trolleybus route started at 31 and went as far as 32. Again, in the post-war livery, that's where the chocolate band would have been, and the side numbers and back numbers fell out of use. In 30th of November 1947, they combined two routes which had terminated in the city centre and created a new through route from Denton Road right through to Osborne Road. They also created a new route, 5C. It was technically a short working of the 5 group, but perhaps should have been given a separate number. But it was extended along Route 3 as far as Delville Road. This, funnily enough, I have been told by an enthusiast that this never actually happened, but there's the pamphlet. If you notice the tear hole in the top left-hand corner, when changes were coming in bus or trolleybus, or tram services for that matter, leaflets would be printed, have a hole punched through them, and piece of string, and they were hanging from a rail on the back platform. You just pulled one off, hence the tear. And this is the reason they combined the two. This area here and down Clayton Street was the fruit market, fruit and vegetable market. And in the morning, this section, Clayton Street, was bedlam. It was greatly congested, and schedules went up the creek. So combining the 3 with this terminal loop for short workings, 3A and 3B, but and especially on Sundays as well. But it didn't have the use it had when it was a terminus for the whole route. The first of the London type Q1 trolleybuses, this may have been taken at Metropolitan Camel Works. These are Metropolitan Camel Wayman bodies, metal construction. I think this might have been the first one delivered. This is all 20 lined up at the side of the bus depot, which is just this pavement runs down the side of it. It must have taken quite a bit of work getting him into that position and getting them back into the depot again. They all are showing the route number at the front. This didn't last into the 1950s for some reason. They stopped putting the route number at the front, but they had them on either side and on the back. They just showed Gosforth originally, even if they were going to one of the 2 short workings. Of course, they had Gosforth Park as the outer terminus. You note that the black indicator box has been blacked out top and bottom to show just a single line. Most of them spent their lives with the indicators unaltered, but a few were dealt with and just repaneled to show just a single destination. This is a gathering of the great and good at Gosforth Park Turning Circle. One of these gentlemen is Frank S. Taylor. I'm not sure who he is. He might be the gentleman with the hat. I've never seen another photograph of him, but it's probably the Tramways Committee people. What's interesting is that the vehicle was towed there. The wiring was up. You can see the turning circle wiring. What you can now see is the gateway into the Gosforth Park and the tramway gantry. The Gosforth Park Light Railway was opened in 1924, and it was literally a light railway right through the park with a 4-track station in the middle. As I've said before, it was planned to run trolleybuses along this once it was converted into a road, but that never happened. What is strange is there's another tow truck there. Why they needed two. That appears to be the Lord Mayor, and this is probably councillors and aldermen prior to the start of public service. What you can't see to the right of the tow truck would be a tram. The trams ran roughly to this point. There was a crossover out of sight. During delivery of the new BUTs, this comparative photograph was taken in Byker Depot. And note the more space on the platform. It's obviously just been delivered. It's not been fitted with indicators, nor has it been painted out, because this box was painted out just to leave a single strip. For some reason, the trolleybuses for many years didn't show Byker Depot, they just showed Byker. The opening of the Gosforth trolleybus route on 18th of April 1948, all the tram services to Gosforth, etc. were withdrawn. And service was 31. 31A was a short working, so was 31B. The 31B had a different route out of the central station and back, but joined with the other two at the Haymarket. And the 31B terminated in Hollywood Avenue beside the Gosforth Greyhound Stadium, where there was a double wire loop, and the 31A terminated at a loop at Polwarth Drive. The original idea had been to go up Polwarth Drive, but the residents campaigned against it, and it was only when the trolleybuses were replaced in 1964 that the buses got up Polwarth Drive. The Grange Estate branch was opened in 1951, and the 31 was diverted there, and the 31B was diverted to Polwarth Drive, and Hollywood Avenue basically fell out of use. In the 1948-49 conversions, a series of circular services were created from the central station. The 39 and 40, the 39 went that way to Benton and along Benton Park Road and back to the Great North Road, and the 40 went the other way around the circle. When the Heaton Road tramway was converted, the 41 and the 42 went from the central, 41 that way, 42 that way. Two new routes were created, 37 and 38, running through to Denton Road, across the city and along the West Gate and West Road. Slateyford Depot was opened built 1956, became and the silver lonin was wired basically for depot workings, because Wingrove Depot was closed as a result. And if they hadn't put that wiring in, it would have meant a massive detour around the city centre to get to the depot from this area. and eventually 2 circular services were arranged along this route. This was the Hollywood Avenue turning circle, the double wiring which went into a junction there. Gosforth Urban District Council had asked Newcastle Corporation there was a bus service down here, Newcastle bus service number 10. Gosforth asked them to divert the bus to another estate and extend the trolleybuses down the length of Hollywood Avenue, the bottom of which was the traction depot for the electric services for the North Tyne electric services out of Newcastle Central Station. However, the residents down Hollywood Avenue objected strongly, and then Hollywood Avenue was never wired. This is a 31A for Grange Estate sitting in one of the 3 loops they had at Central Station. They've gone round a circle along that street and then back round. This was about 100 yards up from the Central Station on a gradient in what was called Neville Street. One of the Gosforth, they were referred to Gosforths as Gosforths, the London type trolleybuses, turning out of Pilgrim Street, a shopping street which led up to the main shopping street, Northumberland Street, turning into Market Street, another busy shopping street. Note the number has gone. This shows you the trolleybus routes that were authorised but never built, never wired, sorry. The extremities of the 2 tram routes that diverged at 4-lane ends, which were not converted, and the line through Gosforth Park to the Gosforth Park turning loop, the Hollywood Avenue extension never built, the Grange Estate extension never built, Polworth Drive never built, and this route here was authorised, but it had been a very lightly used tram route because of a low population density around here, and this huge area called the Town Moor and Nuns Moor, which had no housing on it whatsoever. There was just some housing here and some housing here. The route to Westerhope was authorised, and a route to Kenton Bank Foot, to the city boundary at an arbitrary point. There was some bungalows here and a few houses, but this was just, from here to here was just open country. It was a strange choice. This was a West End bus route, and this was a very long bus route, part of the West Willand tram route. And routes in the East End that should have been trolleybus never were, which explains how the system never got to the size it could have done. A short extension at the top of Osborne Road, they actually planted poles for it and painted them and then changed their minds. Instead of using that section, they wired the bit to the Great North Road. Monday, 1st November was one of the biggest conversions. The trams were withdrawn on Saturday the 30th, and on the Sunday the 31st of October, temporary service of buses was put on, covering the tram routes as far as a place called Benton 4-lane Ends. And I stood at Benton 4-lane Ends on that Sunday morning and watched open staircase AEC Regent buses, which I'd never seen in my life, and looked as if they'd had a dusting down or hauled out to operate that. 2 new bus services started, replacing the outer end of 2 tram routes. And various tram routes were withdrawn, and the city was left with basically one cross-city tram route cut back. 4 new trolleybus routes started, and the 39 was a 2-way circular. I'll come to that in a minute. The 39 had a terminal loop in the city centre by coming down what's called Percy Street, a very sharp left hand into Blackett Street, where they sat that time in the end of the double wiring, and another sharp left hand turn into Northumberland Street. And as this route started with the Sunbeam F7s, the coffins, the 3 axles, I can remember watching one having a bit of a job getting around that corner. However, it only lasted till from the 1st November 1948 to the 15th of January 1949. The 38 was a new route out into the West End, which replaced what had been Route 12 from Wallsend boundary. January 16th, the last tram to trolleybus conversion down Heaton Road here. And that was the maximum extent of the system for a while. This was the Benton Road, Benton Park Road circle in both directions, and the Heaton Road was a circle in both directions. But there were 2 routes from Benton Road, Swoland Avenue, where there was a turning circle, to Denton Road, where there was a turning loop. And on the 16th of January, the Heaton Road circle started. The 39 became a 1-way circle from the central station, the 40 being the opposite direction. And the 37 and 38 served the same termini by different routes in the East End. The last tram route in the East End was withdrawn back to the central station, and the trams operated only between Central Station and Scotford Bridge for a matter of till September that year, when the last tram service was taken off. But Newcastle was still operating trams with Gateshead till March 1950. This was taken outside the works of Northern Coach Builders, and is believed to have been the first of the coffins, the Sunbeam F7s, 499. It's showing Benton via Osborne Road and South Gosforth. It never happened. The 33 never got out of Osborne Road, and that appears to be the intention. One or 2 enthusiasts apparently have claimed that the 33 did get to Benton, but it couldn't get beyond Osborne Road. This was a coffin, a Sunbeam F7 on Denton Bank, the start of Denton Bank. The Denton Hotel down here was a roundabout. It's a lot bigger now, and that along there, past that house, was the start of Silver Lonnon towards Slatyford Depot. It's a 34A for Walker, and it demonstrates the post-war livery with no beading under the top deck or under the bottom deck. No number, of course, on the front. This was legally called Unnamed Back Lane. There's terrace housing going down to the left. And this road here is called Fossway. And this trolleybus has just come out the back end of Biker Depot. And this was a shortcut to what was called Union Road, leading to the Welbeck Road route. And it avoided going round by what would have been a complicated junction at the top of Shields Road and Biker. It had been a tram track and unpaved, but when the trolleybuses came, of course, it had to be paved. And this vehicle is on a midday service, which operated, it circled through Biker Depot and got onto Welbeck Road and went to Wallsend Park Road for a shipyard special in the middle of the day. a Sunbeam S7 in the second siding at Central Station. Note that the blinds have been rubberized. That was done with a few vehicles. The one behind is original. Both NCB bodies, 2-axle, 3-axle. By this time, the Central Station loop was by coming westwards along Neville Street and circling the roundabout. You can see the wiring, and rather than go a huge loop round the back of Clayton Street. Conversions 1944 to 1949. The Elsick Road was 1944. The Northeast Circles were 1948, Heaton Road 1949. Slateyford Depot was built in 1956 and Silverlawn and Wyre in the same year. In 1962, the penultimate wiring alteration, but by this time, by 1962, Denton Road turning loop had become a traffic hazard because this road, Denton Road, had become a sort of ring road. And they extended it across Denton Road and onto a connecting road to this Broadwood Road and built a turning circle. And that only lasted actually 3 years. A London type turning out of the Great North Road in Gosforth to into what was called Broadway West, heading to Grange Estate. After the closure of the 31 trolleybus route in 2nd of February 1964, the London type BUTs could then be seen more or less anywhere. And it would have been very rare to have seen one of these on the 40, the Benton Park Road Circle. Newcastle was very fond of trolley reverses. They had 9 of them throughout the system, all told. This is Wallsend boundary. Note the X and F crossing in Frog. This plate was to be found at all similar places. This is literally the boundary of the city, and in the distance there is the start of the shops in Wallsend High Street. As I mentioned earlier, the trams had run right through until 1930 on a joint tram service, but when the Tyneside tramways and tram roads were converted to motor bus, you can see one there in the distance, the Newcastle trams had to be cut back to the boundary. One of the Sunbeam F4s, not looking in terribly good nick, in Jesmond Road, which is a very, very good part of the city. It's just come up what was called Benton Bank. Why it was called Benton Bank always mystified me, because it's nowhere near Benton, just a steep down or steep back up. One of the Sunbeams, F4s with NCB body in New Bridge Street. These bodies, I've heard of complaints about NCB bodies, and places like Glasgow had trouble with them on bus bodies, but I don't recall that really being much bother in Newcastle with the trolleybus bodies. And another one, this is Barras Bridge. At this point here was one of the 3 electrical overhead points in the system. If you look further back, you can see the stretch of the trolley poles of a vehicle that's also going to come along here into Percy Street. The wiring was never, should have been rearranged back there. it was always difficult, and there were sometimes dewirements if a vehicle was too far over into the middle of the road. Demonstrates the adverts, the fact it was painted on when the vehicle was repainted. This was in a section of road, Jasmine Dean Road, that was not in any of the post-war acts for trolleybuses, but they think it was wired under the any necessary connecting links section of the act. This is the route that should have gone down Osborne Road, because the Great North Road from here down to the city centre, there was not a great deal of traffic. Another view of Wallsend boundary reverser with rather bent trolley pole. He hasn't got round to changing his blind yet. That should be Fenham. He's about to head back west. There had been a plan for around the streets loop here rather than reverser, but like Hollywood Avenue, the local residents put paid to that. This is Wallsend Park Road in the borough of Wallsend. It's the white bus stop on the sign underneath the yellow trolley bus stop indicates it's after June 1963, when the full-time route to here, the 34, had been converted to Atlantean buses. Just up behind the photographer, there was a trolley reverser. They backed into Vine Street and then turned right to come down to here, the loading point. You'll note that the wires are well over towards the pole on the gantry. That's because the bridge here, which was the railway from Newcastle Central to North Shields time of the electric at that time, the bridge was a bit tight, so they slewed the booms over. In the background is Carville Station on the Riverside branch, which meandered following the line of the river between Byker and Percy Main, and came very close to the Newcastle North Shields line at this point. What's interesting is this 35 is a rush hour special. It's been extended from its Welbeck Road terminus to here. And this one marked Fenham is a special going from here via the 35 route to the central station to then take up its route to Fenham. These people here, they're either waiting for a 34 bus or they're waiting for this one. Part of the original 1935 Denton Burn Loop. When this was taken in the 1950s, nothing had really changed since 1935. This had all been here in 1935. What is odd is the width of the road compared with the width of the pavement and hard standing. This type of pole with a bracket arm for two sets of wires was used in one or two places where the roads were not too wide. That's a Sunbeam F4 heading for Osborne Road on the 33, and that one's heading along Silverlawn into Fenham and back to the central station. This was the turning loop at Gosforth Park. The gates are to the right there. At that time, completely rural, nothing. Totally different now. Note the poles are painted white, and you can't see it very well, but there are two lamps on either side of that centre pole, which were illuminated at night. There was very little pickup from this point. You had to go about 2 stops before there was any housing. But on race days, Gosforth Park, there's Gosforth Park Racing Stadium, and horse races are held regularly in the park. And on race days, there will be a service of trolleybuses at a supplementary fee from the central station to the turning loop here, and the regular number 31 would actually be cut back to Polwarth Drive, which was hard lines on the people between Polwarth Drive and the two stops past it. But there was a very frequent service of buses down this section of the road by United Automobile. This is taken, well, the low deckers appeared in the 50s, so it could be anything to the late 50s, early 60s. This, of course, was in Gosforth Urban District Council, and there had been a tentative thought of extending the trolleybuses to North Gosforth, but nothing ever came of that. Denton Square Turning Circle, after June 1963, when the 34 trolleybus became bus and Atlantean operated, instead of saying Wallsend Park Road, they just said Wallsend back. The 35 by this time had been extended to Welbeck Road instead of going down Church Street. Vehicle still in good condition, paintwork's quite smart. It's completely different to the 1938 view. It's all built up, etc. The white bus stop sign there indicates that it's after June 1963. Benwell Church reverser, which was a bit of an odd one. A vehicle wishing to reverse had to cross over to the right-hand side of the road and pass through the slip there, and then it reversed into Nickel Street and then pulled out onto, this was called Adelaide Terrace. And there was a sort of long lead in to the line eastward, so a vehicle coming up these wires could pass a vehicle that had used the reverser. Another reverser was Delville Road, which was a very strange place to have a reverser, but it was the only one in the area that was possibly could be used. Note the gradient of the hill. The trolleybuses pulled across and came round at about 45 degrees and were diagonal across the road, which was not busy, perhaps just as well. And then they had to pull round with quite a tight circle to that position. Now, you can imagine in winter with snow and ice, it was a bit tricky. And the buses don't use that. They don't use that anymore because the frequency along Elswick Road is not what it was in trolleybus days. Note one good point for a driver coming out of the reverser, he had the right of power way through both sets of wires. So he could put his foot, he could have a steady pull right round to that position. Note the Mini. This is an unusual position in Newcastle where the gantry wasn't holding trolleybus wires up, it was holding them down. You see where the brace is on both sides. The trolleybus is on what was called Collingwood Street, which was very steep. It's about to cross Grey Street, a main artery, but it immediately went up an even steeper Moseley Street to Pilgrim Street. And there was a similar gantry at the bottom of Moseley Street, literally holding the wires down. This is just down from the St. Nicholas Cathedral. An early conversion view in April 1948 of the Great North Road. The tram wires have been removed, but the tram tracks are still there. You can see a couple of London type Q1s coming down. Bracket arm construction all the way up to what was called the Blue House roundabout, which was the junction for the Benton Park Road Circle. What trolleybuses were good at, shifting crowds. This is near the Welbeck Road turning circle, just to the left here. This was an area full of shipyards on both sides of the river. Notice the bus seems pretty full to start with, and there's a good queue. This section from here towards End Park Road had numerous extras in the rush hour, before car ownership started to rise among shipyard workers. But most of the shipyards have now gone. The heavy industry, a lot of heavy industry has gone from Newcastle as well as the shipyards. Very few shipyards left in the river at all together. This was a gantry land down Welbeck Road, all the way down towards Welbeck Road's turning circle and all the way back up towards Byker. The trolleybus is turning into Church Street to either go the length of Church Street or reverse back out on the crossover that was there. Beg your pardon, the reverser that was there. When they came out the reverser, they could pull into a loop here to let others go past. This rather grim-looking building on the right, believe it or not, was a school with rooftop playground. Again, use of gantries so they could use tram poles rather than go through a repolling exercise. Byker Depot, trolleybus washing machine, 606. This is an early shot, if it's still got, probably late 40s, early 50s, if it's still got its fleet number at the front. It drove onto that. There it is. And the washing machine rose up round it. So they could drive under power. There was no trouble about that. It rose to the roof and then came back down, and they could drive out, no bother. A Gosforth above a pit, it's been blocked and raised up slightly for inspection, and the actual pit quite smart and tiled, and the underside of the vehicle. This was on the 24th of May 1963. It was a Sunday before the conversion of Route 34, the first conversion of the system in 1963. It's one of the Gosforths, 484. The town hall is on the right. There's the queue barrier for the 34, and the cathedral is off to the left here. And the pensive-looking person in the sort of cream-coloured coat, I believe, is me. I was 26 at the time, and I'm pretty sure it was me. I was certainly on that bus that day. The system closed in 4 stages. 2nd of June 63, the 34 Denton Square to Wallsend. And then quite a big closure, 1st of February 1964, the Gosforth routes, and then the 2 Benton Road, Swollen Avenue to Denton Road routes, and the 39 and 40 Benton Park Road circles, which by that time have been cut back to Newgate Street in the city centre. However, the 29th of May 65 was the real big one. These routes amounted to half of what the system was left. And all the Fenham, Osborne Road and Central Station group of routes, which were like a figure 6 on its back, and the Heaton Road circles, they went, and they left the solitary 35 and not quite solitary 35C. The 35 was an all-day route from Denton Square to Church Street. The 35C was Delver Road to Westbourne Avenue, but it was not all day. And they survived for 16 months, and all routes were replaced by Atlanteans. The rolling stock was withdrawn, started in 1961, 2 years, well, 18 months before the first closure. Passenger numbers have been falling, and there were certain sections of trolleybus routes where there were more motorbuses per hour than trolleybuses, because the new estates that had been built and trolleybuses had not been extended into. And in one case, the trolleybus routes were literally a short working of bus routes. The London vehicles, Q1s, they survived for a year after the Gosforth route closed. The coffins, Sunbeam F7s, they went with the 30th of May conversion in 1965. And what was left, for some reason, the BUT NCB 52 axles, they went before the 3-axle Sunbeam F7s. They went entirely in 64. But what was left was the remnants of the 50 BUT 9641Ts to finish as far as the 1st of October 1966. This was the strangest reverser on the whole system. Matthew Bank is a gentle bank, not too steep, and Beatty Avenue went off at 45 degrees, but very steeply up. A motorbus route had been running since the 1930s and had circled round there like that. Oops. It was apparently too tight for 3-axle trolleybuses, so they designed this reverser. It was a very, very sharp corner into a very sharp gradient, and it was, as far as I know, it was never used by a regular service, because the 39 and 40, the 39 this way, the 40 that way, they never had any short work in St Matthew Bank. It was supposed to have been used by the extension of the Osborne Road trolleybuses, but they never got extended. So as far as I know, it never saw use. A sad sight of any trolleybus system, a load of vehicles, NCB bodies, MCCW bodies, lined up for scrap. This is Beamish Open Air Museum in County Durham, not very far from Newcastle, where they have a very large operating circular museum tram route, which it's a very extensive site. You need the tram route to get round unless you're very good at walking. This is the sole surviving Sunbeam S7 501. The museum has a single set of trolley wires along one section of the tram route, and occasionally this has made the odd trip along it, and I believe a preserved trolleybus from Teesside has also been along it. What is interesting about this bus, AEC Regent, was built by Northern Coach Builders, but not in the same style as the trolleybuses. A change of designer in 1949-50 resulted in a complete change of bus body. In the background is one of Newcastle's early Atlanteans, which just looked like boxes. East Anglia Transport Museum, Carlton, Colville, Lowestoft, Suffolk, which have a trolleybus loop. 501 again, and a 3-axle BUT 9641T 628, which lives at Carlton Colville. 501 was on a visit. This as it near the entrance. There's housing in the back. There's a road that you can't see. This is the last image. And you might wonder why on earth I'm showing a bridge. But what was very sad about the closure of the system on the 1st of October 1966 was it closed without any formal ceremony whatsoever. The last 35 drove into Byker Depot and the power was switched off, and that was it. This bridge was built in 1928 and carried trams till 1950. You can still see the poles which have ornamental lighting on, but the poles were there to hold up tramwires. When it was built in 1928, you'll notice these towers, they come right down to the quayside. Now that was and is a busy area commercially and hospitality-wise now. And because there was no bus service along here till 1948, the only way to get down here was to walk down a very steep hill or walk along the approach road to the towers where there were lifts in both towers. Can you still see it, Roberto?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't know what's happened. That's better.
Okay,
Now, in these towers were lifts, and on Sunday morning, the 2nd of October 1966, when the liftmen arrived for work, the lifts would not operate. And they eventually discovered that when the lifts were installed in 1928, they were wired in to the tramway power supply. And the power supply was right back at the junction with City Road, where, if you recall, where I commented on a 3-axle underfloor bus. And there was a power feed at that point. And when the 63 trolleybus was closed, when the 34 trolleybus was closed in June 63, they must have just left that in the power circuit of the trolleybuses. So when the switch was thrown on the evening of 1st of October 1966, that was the end of the lifts. And they had to, well, they were DC, so they had to, completely reinstall the power supply to the lifts. Well, that, gentlemen, is the end of it. Thank you.